Good afternoon and welcome to Mountain Musings. And as you can see by the Christmas tree in the background, this is an Advent posting. And for the next about 3 weeks, I will be focusing on Advent and what it means to me as a Christian, and perhaps some things that might be useful to you and help you as a Christian. Uh, every year, I begin Advent, my celebration, the day after Thanksgiving, and I spend my time reading scripture that are all focused on the birth of Jesus. And I start in Genesis because truly, if you look back and you pay attention to what's going on, Advent really starts in Genesis. And so I spend my morning devotions focused on the advent of Christ, what that means to me, what that means to us as Christians, and what that means to mankind. And so I ask that you bear with me. In fact, if you've been following my postings, you'll note that I've been doing not quite every day, but most days I post something about Advent, some thought, some thing that has crossed my mind, because this truly is the highlight of my yearly spiritual journey, this examination of what Emmanuel, God with us, means for me, what it means for you, and what it means for our society and culture as a whole. So these are things that I think of and I spend a lot of time being concerned with. So for 3 weeks, I will be looking. And the first week the first week is past, but I spent my time focused on our need. Next week, I'll be focused on the improbable cast of characters that brought Christ into the world. And then the following week, I'll be focused on Emmanuel, God with us. So I hope that this journey brings you as much pleasure as it brings me. The first passage that I have been thinking of that I'm going to spend my time talking about today comes from Matthew chapter 24, verse 12. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. Matthew 24:12, English Standard Version. In this passage, Jesus is talking about how things are going to unfold in the future. And he points out that lawlessness will increase and the hearts of many will grow cold. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look around this world and see that, in fact, lawlessness has increased and the hearts of many have grown cold. Before we go much further, I want to also point out that as a history major in college, one of the things that I learned was that the human race has been just miserably failed as long as we've kept records for us as Christians going back to the garden. We are wretched failures at being decent. And in fact, there's a passage in Ecclesiastes which encourages us to not look back, because if we look back, we're not being wise. Don't say things were better. And that's a popular thing to do, especially for people like myself who have gray hair. We tend to look back and go, oh man, things were so good when I was in high school. But the truth is, things were horrible back then. I grew up in the 60s and 70s. And I remember the Nixon administration. I remember campus protests. I remember the Vietnam War. I remember the struggle for civil rights. So I don't look back and go, wow, I'd like to go back. But I also don't look forward and say, man, things are great. I mean, the truth is, we have become casually acceptant of moral failure. I mean, uh, we elected in our nation a president to lead us for the next 4 years who is a convicted felon. Our hearts have grown cold. Homelessness is rampant in our nation, and we do very little to fix it. Our hearts have grown cold. Uh, People are struggling to make ends meet. Our hearts have grown cold. The rich seem to grow increasingly richer. The gulf between the bottom and the top is vast. And again, we do very little to fix the problem. Our hearts have grown cold. We look out at our beautiful nation and we just consume all the resources with reckless abandon, not giving much thought to the future and what people might need in the future. Our hearts have grown cold. We desperately need Advent. I saw in the news recently about how an angry man killed the CEO of a healthcare company. And I don't know the details. I don't know what motivated him to do that. But again, our hearts have grown cold. We just casually accept the state of things, shrug our shoulders. We see beggars on the street. And instead of being moved out of pity and concern, we just casually assume that, well, they made poor decisions in their life, decisions that led them to that state. So I give them anything, they'll just waste it on drugs or booze. And so we just shrug our shoulders and we walk on by. Our hearts have become cold. It is true that the beggar's decisions probably led them to that state. That is true, but not always. But we forget, spiritually speaking, I stand on the same plane as the worst beggar. I'm not a better person than they are. Oh, my sins might be less grievous socially and societally. I may have made certain decisions that led to a nice house and a good family. I'm not better. I desperately need Advent because my heart has grown cold. Well, I've had a series of technical difficulties. I'm hoping this time it works well. This is the third time I've had to shoot this particular piece, which says that my skills as a cinematographer leave much to be desired. But as I was talking, in looking at myself and looking at my culture and looking at this world, I'm driven to the fact that I have desperate need. We have desperate need. We are a failed people. So what am I supposed to make of this? And how do I fold my desperate need into my understanding of Advent? Well, again, this is part of the reason why I always start in Genesis. In chapter 3, verse 15, we read, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Genesis 3:15. You see, in chapter 3, we read of the fall of mankind and the results. God kind of lays it out. Hey, you have done these things, and these are the results of your actions. So the Genesis 3 is kind of a grim passage. And you're probably thinking, what a dumb place to start Advent. But buried within that is this promise. He shall bruise your head. You see, God has planned from the beginning to fix my problem. And Advent, even though for me it starts with an examination of my desperate need, is about God fixing my problem. He's going to break into my existence and change things. He's going to come and bruise the serpent's head. Recently, I had the grim experience of sitting with a friend of mine while they mourned a desperate circumstance in their life. And I felt for them because things haven't worked out. Through no fault of their own, things have not worked out the way that they wanted, the way that they planned for their life to work out. And that happens. That happens to all of us in some form or fashion. I have not felt their pain. Their circumstance has not been my circumstance, but I've had my own share of disappointments and failures. And there was nothing I could do, not really. Oh, I said the appropriate, I'm sorry about this, and was comforting. But the truth of the matter is they have a tough road that they're going to have to walk. Our world is broken. But God has promised, I will come into your brokenness and I will change things. I will bruise the serpent's head. That's good news. So Christmas, even though my Advent, my study of and reflection on Emmanuel, God with us, starts with a careful examination of my desperate need. Despite that, at the end of that examination is, I'm coming. I will not leave you alone and in the dark. So even in the midst of our pain, our suffering, our failure, Advent is a bright light. Advent shows me how God is going to meet my need. And that's good news indeed. So I hope you stay with me. I hope you go on the webpage and look at the daily musings. They're not quite every day, but most days I put a thought, a scripture, and some thought. This week, they've all been focused on our desperate need, kind of a serious side. Next week, starting tomorrow, we're going to look at this improbable cast of characters that God used to bring about Advent. And that will be a lot of fun because in examining the improbable cast of characters, we're going to discover some things about ourselves and about the possibilities that God may have for you and I. So thank you for joining. Thank you for putting up with the multiple tries to get this thing on video. But most of all, have a blessed Christmas. May your Advent be great indeed. Have a good day.